How's it going? So today we're going to be talking about probably the most frustrating, the trickiest, and the most difficult position to actually draft correctly in fantasy football. This, of course, we're talking about those big fellas that make the big time plays down in the red zone. That's the tight ends. It's basically impossible to find yourself a consistently great tight end player unless you draft one of the top 2 or 3 guys at the position. So today we're going to be talking about the players that are most likely to blow up in your face, ruin your fantasy drafts, and make everything a lot more difficult and give you lots of headaches throughout this season. So, top 12 tight end rankings. Let's hit the intro and get right into it. All jokes aside, I actually love tight ends. I think they're some of the most fun and electric players to watch in the National Football League. I love me some National Tight End Day when we get to watch these guys get special plays drawn up for them, and they get to do stuff like the Philly Special, which is pretty cool to see from the big fellow wide receivers. So Travis Kelce, no questions asked here. He is the tight end 1, finished that way last season for the Kansas City Chiefs. No one hogs as many targets and as much volume in their offense as Travis Kelce, and it's not even close. Actually, there's one player that outdoes him, but that passing offense doesn't quite have as much of a passing volume per se because they don't have Patrick Mahomes on their team. That's the next player up on this list. But 145 targets. This dude's literally a wide receiver 1 if you were to put him in that category. He goes right up there with Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs. The numbers that Travis Kelce give you on a week-to-week basis are insane. 1,400 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns, tied for the league lead last season. Dude's a baller, one of the best tight ends we've seen play the game of recent memory. Obviously, Gronk in his prime was probably better at his peak performance than Travis Kelce, but a 25% target share in an offense led by Pat Mahomes, that's a pretty good deal if you ask me. I'm pretty sure that it might even be higher than what Tyreek Hill has. I'd have to double check my stat sheet, but Travis Kelce, absolute A-plus draft pick. This is a player who I tend to actually overvalue a little bit because of how difficult it is to get the tight end spot right. Because let's be honest, like I joked about in the intro, if there is a position that's going to give you a really promising player, the guy that's supposed to step up, fill the shoes of some monster performer from the last season and be the next breakout player, more likely than not, he flops on his face, blows up everywhere, and is a complete fantasy disaster and meltdown. So we're going to try and avoid those. I'm going to point out some red flags of some of these players, but this is a rankings list, so these are technically all tight end 1s in my opinion, if you ask me. But as we start to get down towards the lower stages of this list, some of these guys are probably streams, and that's the reality of the situation for the tight end position. And I'm going to tell you right now, some players that didn't make it, both Patriots tight ends, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, not on this list because I just don't see the way that they can consistently produce at a good enough level to be maintainable in our offenses or in our fantasy lineups because it's just too hard to predict an offense with a position as tricky as tight ends when tight ends typically have really great red zone and touchdown upside, but their starting quarterback last season threw 8 touchdown passes and 10 interceptions. So pretty tough situation up there in New England. We'll get down to that in a different video, but figured I'd toss that little tidbit in here before we move on to the next player. Travis Kelce, though, far and away by a landslide. The tight end 1, he's on a different class. I love picking him at the back end of the first round in 12, 14-team leagues. If you get him at that last pick or at the top of the second, I think it's great value. I don't like to reach on wide receivers, but when there is positional scarcity and you're essentially getting that type of production here, 110% worth it. Travis Kelce is a beast. Up next here, this is where the hot takes start. This is where, in the extended intro, which we didn't have in today's video, but here you can find all the sizzling hot takes in fantasy analysis. That's what we've got with Darren Waller over George Kittle. That's right. Darren Waller is my tight end 2 for this season. It's been that way this whole offseason, and it is not going to change unless something significant happens in that 49ers offense. I think Darren Waller's got too much of a target share in that offense. He's got too much opportunity to work and put up productive numbers for this team. There's no one else that's competing with him. There's no one else on the same level of a playing field in terms of pass catchers and players that command targets in this offense. A 28% target share, which was in fact higher than Travis Kelce with the Kansas City Chiefs last season. He actually saw just one more target than Travis Kelce did, 146 to 145. Fight me. Those are both numbers that are sky high through the roof. no one else is within 20 or 30 targets of these two players. So when you talk about a Nelson Agholor, who is the most productive receiver in this offense, not a very high volume guy, but still a productive and very efficient player and a receiver in his own right, he's out of there. And the next man up is probably John Brown, who they brought in off the free agent market. He's probably the next guy in line to step up and take that role. I think that he might even surpass a Henry Ruggs because, if we're being honest, he can't run routes, and he's really, really fast, and he's got the ability to go up and make the contested grab, but he's just not a refined player yet. He's not a guy that you can trust to go out there and be an X receiver because he just hasn't shown the polished ability to do those other things that we love to see out of true productive fantasy receivers. Maybe he proves me wrong. Maybe he breaks out the season. If you think I'm wrong about Henry Ruggs, let me know in the comment section. Let me know why he's in for a breakout season. But I just don't see it coming. It would be a big shock to me. It's something I would welcome. I think he's a cool player. I think that it'd be awesome for the Raiders to have that threat in their passing game. But you talk about a guy who had that many targets in Darren Waller, almost 1,200 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. And again, over a quarter of the passes in this offense went to him. This isn't a team that throws the ball a ton, but that's still a very, very valuable chunk of that offensive production, and I can't overlook that. And the main thing that sets him apart is his ability to produce in the touchdown category, which is something that we don't see out of George Kittle. And George Kittle is a player who is probably more talented than a Darren Waller. This is one of the best, and I'd say most complete tight ends in the National Football League. Absolutely dominant as a blocker. I mean, you've probably seen the highlights on NFL's Instagram or the 49ers social medias if you're a fan of that team. He just blows dudes off the ball and sends them flying, looking silly. That's George Kittle's game. He's a fun-loving dude. He's a goofball. He'll do a bunch of silly stuff on the field, say a bunch of goofy things. But he's a baller. He's a fantasy stud when we take a look at him. Only 8 games last season. The main thing that he has also struggled with, in addition to that touchdown production, which I'll touch on here in a second, is that he's just been injured a lot. And he's been a player that's been on the shelf for the majority of a couple of seasons now. He's only played 4 years in the National Football League, but missing 8 games last year is a pretty significant marker, and he's missed time before. He hasn't missed an entire season, but he has been unavailable for stretches of time because he's been a little bit dinged up. So at this point, is it fair to start kind of throwing that injury tag on him? I think that there's a point when it becomes a bit warranted. Now, I'm not going to put him out of my top 3 and be a complete goon here doing that, because when he's healthy, he's going to give you numbers. But let's say he did play all 16 games last season and pace him out to that production. So you talk about playing 8 games last year. Now there's going to be 17 games in the regular season this year, but only 16 last year. So we can basically just multiply these numbers times 2 to pace him out to get to that 16 game marker. You're looking at 126 targets. So still 19 or 20 less targets than a Travis Kelce, than a Darren Waller. Only 2 receiving touchdowns. And he's never had more than 5 in a single given year in his career. That's a little bit concerning to me. Now, maybe he has the room for improvement. Maybe he has the ability to increase that number. Maybe we just seen him scratching the surface of what he can do. But when you talk about a tight end who at one point held the record for most receiving yards at the position in a single season in NFL history, you'd think he would have put up more than 5 touchdowns. And the touchdowns weren't coming in the red zone. That's not been the area of the field that he's really strived in over his pro career. It's been long passes, run after catch, bowling guys over, throwing them out of bounds, making these crazy plays. So George Kittle's one of the most talented players on the planet at his position. He's an all-around stud, does everything in the game well. I just don't think I can put him above a Darren Waller, especially when you look at the 49ers offense. I wouldn't say that Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo are elite quarterbacks, but I think that Derek Carr is maybe a little bit better of a quarterback situational thing to have in your offense than Jimmy G is right now. Maybe Trey Lance comes in and he's got that crazy high upside and really good situation to develop in. Maybe that helps George Kittle increase his production. So let me know what you think about the Darren Waller George Kittle debate. I'm definitely on the side of Darren Waller here. I'm a Darren Waller over George Kittle in fantasy football at the tight end position this year. It's something I've thought long and hard about, and I think that the overall floor and at the same time upside is very, very good for Darren Waller. I think both of these players are going to be studs, but Darren Waller is a player I trust just a little bit more, and you can get both of these players for a fairly reasonable price, and George Kittle actually goes earlier in drafts. So I would maybe not take Darren Waller crazy high on the board and overreach for him, but I think he's a player that's a really realistic shot to have on your fantasy team this season, and is a guy I think that will put up really, really great numbers there. So moving into the tight end 4 spot, again, one of those takes I think here that a lot of people aren't going to see coming. TJ Hawkinson as my tight end 4 Why? And this comes down to the simple fact that the Lions just don't have anyone else in that offense to throw the ball to. For the tight end position, you talk about an 18% target share. That's a really, really nice number for the tight end spot. And typically we see that go to wide receiver 2s in offenses, and those main players in an offense are usually around that 20% marker. But I just think that for a player who already finished as tight end 4 last season with not really all that impressive of numbers, I mean, he had a decent stat line. He saw a decent amount of targets, but there's even less options to go with the ball for the Lions this year. And Jared Goff comes into the Lions offense this year as a player that we've seen produce with fancy tight ends in the past, whether it be Tyler Higbee or whether it be Gerald Everett. He has gotten it done with multiple players, and I think that's something that's encouraging here. Brashad Perryman, Quintez Cephas, Tyrell Williams, I don't think that any of those players we can legitimately say are better at their position than TJ Hawkinson. And for a player like Jared Goff, he's not an elite quarterback. He's going to want to go somewhere with the football that's close to the line of scrimmage. That's probably going to be TJ Hawkinson. I think he's going to get a lot more, even if he goes up to only 19, 20, 21, maybe let's say his ceiling is 22% of the target share. That's an elite level of volume at a position that we don't typically see get that much work. So Hawkinson's a guy I'm all over in drafts this season. I'm absolutely taking him above a guy like a Kyle Pitts, who's coming up here on the list, and I put him slightly ahead of a guy like Mark Andrews, because while I love Mark Andrews and he's one of my favorite tight ends to watch, he struggles a little bit more in the volume department because that's just not what the Ravens are. This isn't a passing-first offense. They want to play smash-mouth football, run the ball, and set up that play-action offense. Where Mark Andrews does his work in fantasy is down near the red zone. He catches touchdown passes. He had 7 of them last season. And the thing that I do think sets Mark Andrews apart from the crowd here is while he only saw 89 targets last season, that's not that much. That's pretty pedestrian if you put that through the lens of a wide receiver. But again, it's so much harder to find productive tight ends that we take that number. That's still 25% of the target share in Baltimore, which is astounding to me that would equate to that much of the target share on the offense. But it does. The Ravens just don't sling the ball around the lot that often. They're a team that I think can do that a little bit more this season. They might have to do that a little bit more this season. But Mark Andrews is a guy I feel safe with because it's been 2 seasons where we've seen him be that productive fantasy player and be that type of guy we're looking for in our lineups. The tight ends or the touchdown ceiling is something I guess you can talk about as being shaky. He's a little bit more of a boom bust player, but nonetheless, Mark Andrews is a player that I would feel very, very nice about taking here as the tight end 5 off the board. And something I think we're finally seeing come back down to earth a little bit more. Kyle Pitts was going in the 4th round of fantasy drafts for a little bit not too long ago, and he slipped back to the mid-5th. We're looking towards the 6th round now. That's fair. And I think the Kyle Pitts, while he was going above Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson, that was clownish behavior, if you ask me. And I think that Kyle Pitts has all the potential in the world. He probably could be better than any other player on this list at some point in his career if he hits his ceiling, but it ain't going to be this season, not as a rookie. Even if we talk about him having like an 8-touchdown, 10-touchdown season and having, 700, 800 yards, I still don't think he's going to get the target volume he needs to surpass a player like TJ Hawkinson. I think his ceiling is the tight end 4 spot this year, and I think that his ceiling maybe in 2022, 2023 is tight end 1 overall. But this year, there's a little bit of rookie fever going on right now. We're looking at the raw potential, the raw perspective analysis on a player that has this much talent. But at the end of the day, what I think it comes down to here is the tight end position is so hard to develop in year 1, so hard to hit on. These guys have to have a transition period. You go from not only catching passes at a college level, but you also go to blocking bigger bodied players at the defensive line very, very quickly. So again, Hayden Hurst in this offense, they might split some time. They're probably going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, but I think that it's not as much of a slam dunk as we all want to think it is with Kyle Pitts here. Moving into the system with Julio Jones out of there, maybe there's more opportunity to be had. I think he's got a really high ceiling, but that floor is not something that I'm overly excited about. And while I am excited about his long-term potential, there's a lot of red flags, a lot of risks here that I think are associated with him. Noah Fant, right behind Kyle Pitts, and in the last 5 years here, as I would say, probably the most athletically impressive tight end at the position. The player I'd say had the highest ceiling if you asked me a couple years back. He's just had a tough time with injuries. He's missed a few games every season. And the Broncos just haven't had the right quarterback. And hopefully they've got that in Teddy B right now. But when I dove into the numbers, what I was actually really encouraged to see was in 14 games, Noah Fant had 93 targets still. We're looking at, that's a number higher than Mark Andrews even last season. So a player that I've got a couple spots back here still has the volume in what I would even consider to be a fairly crowded offense. So, you know, the Broncos have got KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton. And while Courtland Sutton wasn't playing last year, that's something to take into consideration as well. And then they've got some firepower in their backfield, or at least they did last season. And bringing in Javonte Williams can only help with that. So I think it's going to be kind of a race this year, to be honest. Teddy Bridgewater, is he going to connect with Jerry Jeudy first, or is he going to connect with a Noah Fant first? Camp indicates that it's going to be Jerry Jeudy, so that's why Noah Fant slides back down the list a bit here. And again, he's had some health issues. He's missed games. He's had a nice ceiling. He's put up nice numbers. And for a player that only had 3 touchdowns last season, I think that leaves all the world of potential for him to increase that marker. Like I talked about the George Kittle, when you're at that low-end touchdown count, it can really only ever go up. You're not going to see too much of a drop-off in that category. So if he can just find a spot in this offense, find a connection with Teddy Bridgewater, I think he'll be a player that's pretty good at his position. But again, the tight end spot here, there's a lot of question marks about virtually all these players after the first 5 or 6 or so here. And even, you know, I talked about with Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts, my concerns. So a lot of stuff to take into consideration here. I would not overdraft just because of the talent that Noah Fant has. You've got to have some sort of a value. He's got to fall to you at a spot that's really advantageous for your lineup. Don't pick him just to pick him. There's probably better value at other spots on the board when players like this are up on the block. Next up here is Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles. This is one that honestly, I'm not all that crazy about Dallas Goedert as a talent. I'm not overly high on him as a player, as a prospect. This is more so just an Eagles situation. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the trend in Philadelphia has been they want to get the tight ends involved. They want to run 2 tight end sets, and that's been Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. And who the heck knows what's going on with Zach Ertz right now? There's reports about the Bills. There's reports about virtually every tight end needy team out there. I think the Packers have been tossed around in that conversation, but that's never going to happen. If you've ever paid 1 second of attention to the Green Bay Packers, you know that going out and making aggressive moves is not exactly something they do. So I could throw out some more Packers slander there, but I'll cut myself off at that. We're talking about Dallas Goedert. So Dallas Goedert, he's got Jalen Hurts, and he's not necessarily a quarterback we've seen be overly dependent on the tight end position like we have seen a Nick Foles, a Carson Wentz be in the past, but I still think he's good enough and desperate enough to find some sort of a target, an offensive weapon on the football field to go this route and try and, you know, involve a Dallas Goedert in this offense. It literally has to be the Devontae Smith show and the Dallas Goedert show or bust for this passing game. Rager's going to do some things on deep balls. He's going to get involved here and there, but he is not going to be a value or a volume player, a week in, week out, consistent lineup piece. That's just not the situation that I'm reading right now from the Eagles. He's being used in the slot. He's not that much of a pure route runner. You're going to see him running a lot of seams up the field, a lot of post corner routes, and trying to connect on those deep balls. So Goddard's a player I think probably has the second best receiving role in this offense. That's why he's up here on the list, just because I think his usage is going to be pretty high. And for a guy that had 17% target share last season and had some injury issues, that's a pretty prominent role in this offense, so I feel pretty good about that. Mike Gesicki for the Dolphins up next here. Gesicki is a guy who, again, he saw a decent amount of targets, not anything overly crazy, but with a player like Tua under center, I think that based off the reports we're hearing, based off of how I watched him play last year, he's looking for the easy plays right now. He's still adjusting the National Football League. I don't think he's this, tank for Tua, if we all remember that. He was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread at the quarterback spot. That's clearly not what we got on Tua Tagovailoa. I think he has a lot of potential and could still be a very good franchise quarterback, but he's struggling right now. He's having an adjustment period. He needs those guys close to the line of scrimmage, those guys that can go up and win those jump and contested balls and give him a sense of safety and security that the ball is coming down in the right hands. That's what Mike Gesicki was last season. He was the jump ball guy in the red zone for Tua. He had one of the highlights of the season last year with that athletic catch. That's one of the things Mike Gesicki is best at, is pure athleticism and his leaping ability. That's something I see being a lot of the same this year, although they did address a lot of pass-catching positions this offseason. I just think that those other guys are going to be running deep every play, and Mike Gesicki is going to be the safer option for Tua to go with the ball. So my tight end, what are we at? Tight end 9 now. So 85 targets, 53 receptions, 16% of the target share last season. Gesicki, I expect very, very similar numbers this year. I don't really know if I would project him for an increase. Like I said, they are adding more pieces to this offense, but I don't think that a workload is going to come down because of the dependability I think he presents for Tua in this offense. Logan Thomas up here. This is one of the most interesting players I want to talk at this position about, because if there was one candidate that I was going to tell you I think would blow up in your face and be a complete disappointment from what you expected after watching last season, it's Logan Thomas. And I had nothing against the guy. I thought he was actually a really great story. I loved watching him play last year because he impressed me. But we're talking about a 30-year-old player, or he will be 30 on July 1st is actually his birthday. I went ahead and did my research before this video. And you had never heard of his name before this year. You didn't even know who Logan Thomas was. And when I saw he was just randomly catching touchdown passes last year, I was like, who the heck is this guy? Why is he worth my time in fantasy? But the more I watched him, the more I liked him. But then I talked about, this is a player who transitioned to quarterback just a season ago. This is to tight end. He was a former quarterback and transitioned to virtually save his career and keep his career alive in Washington. So this is a player that I think has a lot of question marks. It's not every day that you see, a tight end switch to the position and get 110 targets, 6 touchdowns, and 19% of the work share in that passing offense for the Washington football team. So if there's anyone I think is bound for a decline in usage rate this year, I think it is Logan Thomas. You bring in players like Curtis Samuel, Diami Brown. They're going to get their work. They're going to be utilized in this offense. This Washington football team offense was so vastly depleted of any talent anywhere. They had to squeeze it out wherever they could find the chance. So, this is literally like a Tim Tebow fairy tale story. You just don't see this stuff happening, and I would never project a Tim Tebow who's coming in from playing quarterback, and that's not quite the same because Tim Tebow was out of the league for years and years. But I'm not going to come in and tell you Tim Tebow is a top 12 tight end and project him out for 110 targets. It's just not the smart thing to do. So Logan Thomas, I like I said, I like the guy, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's in for a down season and he's in for some regression here, because he's walking into his age 30 season in just his second year as a starter at the position. So let me know, Logan Thomas, maybe a bit of a polarizing player here. Let me know your thoughts on him. Let me know why you think he's going to stay the same, get better, get worse. I'm open to talk about anything and everything fantasy football with anyone who chooses to stick around here on the channel and be a part of that community. Remember, you can join the SFS community by simply going down and joining the Discord, clicking the subscribe button, and sticking around throughout the season with me. We'll have a great time. Remember, I talked about we're going to be doing a giveaway for the SFS channel, and our 1-year anniversary is coming up here. So we're going to be doing giveaways, different community interactive events, getting you guys involved in some live streams and doing some fun stuff like that. So I can't wait for what we've got coming up this season and the rest of the summer here. But now with our tight end 11, we've got good old Rob Gronkowski. Let's be honest, Gronk's just good for touchdowns at this point in his career. 7 of them last season, only a 13% target share though. That's nothing crazy whatsoever. Only caught 45 of 77 targets as well. So not like he's being incredibly productive or dependable with the targets he's getting. I love Gronk. He's one of the most fun players, one of the best to play the position in my lifetime. But I think we're pretty much towards the end of the road here. Gronk is still very valuable for those big jump ball plays in the end zone. And like I said, these tight ends are like big play wide receivers down there. But he's going to come in. He's going to score his red zone looks and whatnot. He's going to cash in a couple times every once in a while for your team, and he'll be a nice streaming play. I used him in a lot of leagues last year when I picked him up off the waiver wire. I think he was actually crazy overvalued in draft season last year, and then he started to pop towards the back end of the season when he was getting that high volume of red zone looks. But nonetheless here, Rob Gronkowski, tight end 11. He's a nice play, but nothing I'm overly excited about. And then I'm going to bash on my Green Bay Packers here for a second. Robert Tonyan, his tight end 3 performance from 2020, it's not sustainable. This is in for a major setback, a major regression season. Love the guy dearly. He looks like he wants to be the next George Kittle. He literally molded his hairstyle. They're buddies, by the way. Molded his hairstyle and his look completely after him. Wears the little shoulder tape and wrap that Kittle wears all the time. You see that in the picture there. But Tonyan caught 52 of 59 targets. He literally only let 7 balls drop to the floor last season, and 59 targets is relatively a joke, by far lower than anyone on this list. I just talked about Gronk being a solely touchdown play. 77 targets. That's what? Quick maths here. 18 higher? I don't know. I suck at math, guys. So, nonetheless, you're looking at a guy who's getting no target volume. Where did all of his production come from then last season, Gavin? Well, it was touchdowns. He had 11 of them, tied with Travis Kelce, who, guess what, finished as tight end 1 Well, Travis Kelce, he was one of the best tight ends in football. How did Robert Tonyan manage to maintain that level of production? I honestly couldn't tell you, because he had 586 yards receiving, and that is 600 to 800 yards less than Darren Waller and Travis Kelce at the top of the mountain there. So it was literally all touchdown production. This guy was really, really fun to watch, made explosive plays downfield, caught the ball deep, rarely got run after catch, but he was still able to do some work there. He's a really fun player. He's a really nice piece of our offense, but the fantasy value just isn't there for a year-over-year value. He's going to have to see an uptick in his usage. And if you want to talk about the Packers for a second, they passed the ball more in 2019. They had more actual passing attempts in 2019 when Aaron Rodgers only threw like 26 touchdown passes than he did last year when he won the MVP and threw 48 touchdowns. So if we see a dip in the amount of passing attempts, there's a very good chance that they see a dip in productivity and efficiency than they did last season as well, just because there's some drop-off bound to happen there for a team that hit that high of highs last season. So Tonyan, he'll be a nice streamer maybe. He'll have some role on fantasy teams, but he's not going to be the tight end 3 probably ever again in fantasy. And I'd be shocked if he cracked double-digit touchdowns as well, because he only had 12% of the target share in Green Bay. There you go. Those were those tight ends that, as we talked about, are going to blow up your fantasy lineups and probably be really frustrating players that are going to wreck your week sometimes. So I apologize in advance for the headaches, the trauma, the emotional devastation that this position causes fantasy managers, but it happens to all of us every single year. So thank you so much for watching. If you're new around here to the channel and you enjoyed today's video, head down and click that subscribe button, turn the bell on, and make sure you are notified and aware every time we come out with a new piece of content here. We're 4 to 5 days a week through Monday through Friday in terms of posting videos, and we do other stuff on our social medias that you can see up there at the corner of your screen as well. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace out.